My guest today is Hamish Sewell, sound trails expert, maybe? We've just had the most fabulous conversation, and I've learnt so much about geolocative storytelling. Hamish says it's the way of the future, and I've got to agree with that. Hamish, where can people find out about your work?
You can find out about my work on storiedland.com. That's storiedland.com, and check out some of the work that we've been doing.
Yeah, we've also got a podcast workshop coming up at the Old Ambo in late May and June, with Hamish leading the way for us. We're going to learn so much. Stay right through to the end. My name's Robin Cook. This is Stories from the Red Couch. I know you'll love it. What does geolocative storytelling give to us? Why is it valuable, and what's so interesting about it?
Hi everybody. Geolocative storytelling can be many things. It could be text on location, it could be images on location, it could be real estate jingles with a song, it could be all sorts of things. But the geolocative stuff that I'm really interested in is audio-based, primarily audio-based geolocative storytelling. I think audio brings a whole history of speaking and the oral culture. It brings the voices, it brings people's connection to each other, people's connections to the land. And when you listen to those stories and you experience those voices on location, there's something quite different happening here than if you were to listen to stories, voices on radio. So
sitting in your own car or your lounge room or whatever.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example, for instance, of a beautiful. I'll give you two examples. Mm-hmm. One's called the Cartographer's Confession, which is in London, and the Cartographer's Confession is a piece of fiction written by a writer called James Attlee, and he's written and recorded and voiced this beautiful story around a young boy who's searching for his mother, who disappeared after the Second World War. And it takes you around the Tate Modern, it takes you to the Borough Markets, it takes you to Leicester Square, it takes you to Bermondsey in London, all journeying through the eyes of this young man who's lost his mother, where they were living on the streets of London. And it's the most remarkable way of...
And so you're walking through those areas with headphones and a map to lead you the way, or is it directing you? Or
I guess you're talking about the functionality of how this would work.
Yeah.
And with something like the Cartographer's Confession, it happens through chapters. They're kind of adapting it like it's a book. And so chapter 1 happens around the Tate Modern, chapter 2 happens at the Borough Markets, chapter 3 is on the north side.
So you're going to all of those places?
You're going to those locations, and then you walk in and out of a range of stories that pertain to things like statues, old under bridges, and they're really bringing them to life with the skill of just this masterful kind of writing and beautiful sound production. And of course you've got that primary narration, which is the young boy who's wondering what on earth happened to his mother. So it's kind of taking the novel and it's putting it on site in the most eloquent and beautifully choreographed way.
That's fabulous.
So that's one example of a geolocative type of story. Another example would be something like Consent, which is done by a guy called Chris Brookes in Canada. And there was a really famous rape case in Canada and Newfoundland where the policeman was acquitted on the charges of rape. And what Chris Brookes did is he took the testimonies from the transcripts and he reworked them into this incredibly immersive, place-based piece of journalism that took listeners along part of the route of where the incident happened. And you've got the woman's testimony and you've got the man's testimony, and basically they're quite similar for a while, and then of course around the time of the sexual incident, because there was a sexual incident happened, the account split. And so you've got those voices, but it's not just the voices, it's not just the testimony, it's crafted, beautifully produced audio stories that have background soundtracks, they have police two-way radio, they're sophisticated pieces.
So at the moment, podcasts, and particularly real life crime kind of podcasts, are exploding. Like, it's really popular.
Yeah.
But I guess that adding that element of geolocative element would just elevate it to a whole different level, wouldn't it? Because you're really getting a whole range of sensory experiences in that place as well, like smell and the feel of the air on your skin and light in your face. So, well, that's really quite powerful.
And that location,
when you think of it like that.
That location brings with it a whole set of associations. It brings with it history.
Yeah, because you're just really seeing the surroundings.
And that's where location-based storytelling is going to go in the future with AR and mixed reality.
Yes.
And I think, a lot of people are kind of a bit sort of poised at the moment with this idea of virtual reality, because virtual reality basically means you've got to stick these bloody goggles on your head, and you've got to wander around, throw your head around, and it's quite sort of discombobulating. Whereas mixed reality or augmented reality are going to use geo-locative, and one of the primary drivers is going to be audio here, and it will be the storytelling, the voices, the tonal sort of resonances that connect with that site that will really lift up and draw out those stories on location.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
When we talk about stories, there's that adage that goes, everybody has a story. But is that actually the case? And I want to understand the difference between a narrative and storytelling. Is it the same thing or is it different?
Look, I'm no expert here, and I feel like I'd step out of my comfort zone pretty quickly. But I do think that there's, if there's one thing that I would say around this, it's that there's a lot of focus on everyone's got a story at the moment, whether it's Richard Feidler's podcast, whether it's The Moth. And I think there's something wonderful about that, and it brings people together, and it does celebrate the universality of stories. But I think that there's something that steps beyond that, and that's the orality or the tactile, almost kinesthetic nature of audio as a vehicle for connecting people in different ways, not just through once upon a time sort of narrative. And I think, for example, when you hear someone who is rummaging through the bush and they're at what was a deeply significant Aboriginal site and they're talking about what they're finding on the ground, there's not necessarily a narrative there.
No.
But if that's beautifully placed so that someone might be experiencing that while they're moving between sort of sites where there might be stories, that can be just as powerful, sometimes even more powerful than the more narrative-based stories that are, I guess, narrative being there's a sense that there's text, there's words, there's a sense that a story is being delivered more consciously.
Yeah, because you've done some story, you've got a business called Sound Trails, and you've done geolocative storytelling in different places. Quite a few along the northern New South Wales tablelands, haven't you? Tell me about those.
Well, we started off, I think 5 years ago, wanting to take all this recording work that we were doing in a small town called Uralla, which is just south of Armidale, and And instead of it being plonked in an archive where next to no one would ever access it,
Yes.
or being put onto a website where there's this really passive engagement with what you're listening to, because you're sitting at a screen and this picture will come up, you'll click on that picture. It's not like being on location. It's a whole different ballgame being on location. So we had these beautiful stories which were testimony to the town that we'd got through another project that we'd worked on. And they weren't just necessarily interviews, they were often two people talking to each other.
Okay.
So you had this amazing rapport between brother and sister, father and daughter, and they had this common story. So it's less of an interview and more of a banter, a rapport, where there's common interest in sharing something that they wanted kept. So, for instance, when you go to Uralla and you download the Uralla Sound Trail and you walk in Elmer Park, there's this beautiful piece which crosses a little footbridge there, and it's testimony to the pressure that they were trying to get young men in Uralla to enrol in 1917 in the First World War, and the men didn't want to enrol. They wanted to stay on the farm, they had to look after their families. They knew in 1917 that they were being conned. It was a really brutal, bloody war. And so there's all these accounts that are given to the enrolment board. It's a government where they put pressure on these young men and they said, why won't you sign up? And they were saying things like, I've got a mother and father to look after, or I've got a mental illness, or I've got children, but of course they were able to ride horses and they were able to shoot guns, so they were very useful. Now you get people who live in Uralla being able to kind of talk about those memories, and you're able to layer in archival footage on that bridge, which is a memorial park in Uralla, and you've got a different set of experiences that I think take storytelling in a whole new direction. And you get original music layered into that, which is sensitive to 1917, to maybe the men fighting in the Middle East, and you layer that in there and you put archival stuff in there, and I just love it. I think it's the experience of voices and stories on a whole new level that I don't think... And
it is immersive, isn't it? When you're there, you're standing there, you're in that place.
It's embodied, because you're between this virtual world, which is this thing which is happening to you through voices, and we have images and text and stuff, but it's largely audio based. And there you're on this location in a town that was, a huge amount of men in those regional towns signed up for the First World War, enormous amount. So it really bears, there's a really strong resonance there.
How many stories have you done
in
like
sound
that?
trails? Hundreds.
Wow.
Hundreds.
Okay. There's one in Nambour.
Yeah, there's one in Nambour. There's one in Nambour, and there's some beautiful stuff in Nambour.
I know. Well, my sister and brother-in-law walked that trail, and they were actually quite surprised and learnt so much that they just had no idea that they were going to learn. So I guess that's the other part of it, isn't it? Is an ability to hear these stories, but learn something of a town, even when it's your town, that you didn't necessarily know about.
And I guess it could be a community, though. It doesn't necessarily have to be a town, does it?
Sure.
It could be a place where something important historically happened, and there's still those connections, and it brings them to life, literally, in a contemporary structure through something like an app. And it's the way it's going to go. Storytelling is going to go in this direction.
Is it hard to do? I mean, I know that it's going to be hard to do, but is it really hard to do?
I think there's a whole range of different questions that come to the idea of storytelling. For instance, in radio or podcast, storytelling is a linear format, and you've got a range of sort of tools that are available, whether it's different voices, archival sound. You might have instead of chapter breaks in a book, you might have, you know, a common sound that might signal we're in chapter 2 or chapter 3. You might have an authorial voice. I think what you've got here is you've got the added layer of time and space. So people are walking across places, and to a certain degree you're anticipating their movement according to a certain time frame or according to certain places that you want them to go to. So it becomes a much more, I suppose, sophisticated and dynamic sort of storytelling or sound experiencing thing. For instance, you know, there's this great app called Vanitas, which was part of the Horizon Festival last year. It's a great app, and you know, it really should be out there and really, you know, sung as a great piece. But one of the things that they do, which I think is terrific, is while you're walking across this cemetery and you're getting a range of sound stories that pertain to the aesthetics of cemeteries, the history of funerals, the type of etiquette that was around sort of the funerary industry. Every now and then you get a text message, and the alleged funeral director is meant to be coming to see you. And they're texting you saying, "I'm so sorry, Hamish. You know, I've had a flat tyre, the hearse is parked on the side of the road." So what you've got there is you've got this idea of it's adding to the experience, but it's disrupting one story and taking you out, and then you're kind of coming back into that story.
Wow.
And I think it's really effective. And
That's incredible.
It's a reminder that these sorts of stories hinge on all sorts of ways that you can fashion people engaging with a place and the stories and the sounds and the history that's written into places in so many dynamic ways.
That's it. I find the whole thing fascinating, and I'm really keen to learn some more about it. And we've got a workshop coming up.
We've got a podcast workshop coming up.
We have, at the old ambulance station. So come along to the old ambulance station. It's in May, and the end of May and June.
It's in May and the end of June. So if you guys, is anyone interested in podcasting and learning how to do crash hot podcasts? I think we've got the combination of the media makers here at the old ambulance station, and we're drawing on some of the work that I've been doing with podcasts.
Yeah, with sound trials. It's just fabulous.
Well, I mean, we've done through the old ambulance station. There's been the Nambour Variety Show, which is a deep down and gritty expose into a wonderful community, a creative community in the making. And I've recently been involved in 2 podcast series, beautiful podcast series around stories that come out of the disability sector. So, I mean, there's so many ways in which I think you can use podcasts effectively to get people to go further and engage. Because you think about it, I mean, if you're listening to a podcast and it might be, say, 10 or 15 episodes, you might be travelling with those people and that story for anything up to 10 or 15 hours. Yes. You're really engaged in it.
That's right. Yeah, there's a lot of depth there. Yeah. All right, thank you for joining me, Hamish. That's fantastic. And jump onto the old ambulance station Facebook page or website and have a look and book in for that podcast workshop with Hamish.
The podcast workshop?
Yeah, because it's going to be fabulous. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.